Hi, everybody. Are you all ready for Rosh Hashanah?
No.
Few
Can.
more days. Okay, so we covered the idea of free will or man's governance over himself, that God granted man this special, unique being, this special, unique power to be co-creator along with him in how this universe is going to play out. All right. Another way to call this unique aspect of man as God's partner is we call it Tselem Elohim, the image of God. And today I want to take a look at a different aspect of this image of God, specifically how it relates to this week's Perashah, Nitzavim, and also to Rosh Hashanah, and what does the Shofar have to do with all of this? Okay, so the Perashah starts, Atem nisavim hayom kullechem lifnei Adonai Elohechem. Right? All of you are standing before God. Right? All of us. And it comes to specify who is all of us. Rashechem shiftechem, the heads of the tribes. Ziknechem, the elders. Vishoterechem, right? Then the judges and the police, Kol Ish Yisrael, everybody, all the members of the nation of Israel, and it goes on to specify more, Tapechem, Neshechem, right? The young, the women, the Gerecha Asher Bekerev Mahanecha, right? Even the strangers, meaning the people who live in Israel who aren't actually citizens of Israel, and Gerecha. This is not even to speak about the way we use Gerim today as converts, because those are already part of Israel. This is even the stranger who lives among Israel, or maybe those in the conversion process who live part of the Jewish nation who haven't been certified Jews yet in the Beit Din, right? V'gerecha shel bekerev mahanecha, all the gerim too. Mechotev esecha ad shoev meimecha. We see in Sefer Yehoshua that the strangers, or how do you call it, those who made an alliance with the Jewish people who didn't actually become part of the nation, but they made an alliance, they got a special job to be lumberjacks, to cut down the trees and supply the wood and water to the Mikdash and to the Mishkan. Says, why are we all assembling? Le'ovrecha bivrit Adonai Elohecha uva'alato. Right? That you shall pass through this, make this covenant with God. This is this week's Perashah, the end of the Torah, right? To make this covenant with God, Asher Adonai Elohecha koret imecha hayom, right? That the Lord, that God makes with you today, this day. What covenant is this? What covenant is He making with us this day? At the end of Sefer Devarim, at the end of the 40 years in the desert, right? We already made the covenant in Sinai, in Horeb, right? 40 years prior. He says, no, all of you today are making the covenant at the end of the 40 years. That He will establish you today as a nation, right? Because this is the eve of crossing into the land of Israel. The covenant takes place in the land of Israel. We're a nation state in a certain country, in a land, right? Part of that covenant is to have this country and to establish a state. So all this, so while we made a covenant with God at the beginning of the 40 years, right, 50 days after the exodus from Egypt, right, the covenant is only going to be fully established and ratified in Eretz Israel. Moshe, by the way, won't be present there. It's after we cross into the land. But in his speech, his final speech, the eve of crossing into the land, he says, "You are all gathered here today, everybody, even those who weren't present back then." And you know what? Look what he says. לא איתכם לבדכם, אנוכי כורת את הברית הזאת ואת העלה הזאת. Not only am I not making this covenant only with you who are standing here today, את אשר ישנו פה עמנו עומד היום, right? But those who stand here with us today, ואת אשר איננו פה עמנו היום, and those who aren't with us today. Meaning it's not just those who were around 40 years ago at Sinai, and it's not just you in the eve of crossing into Eretz Israel, but also those who aren't born yet. All of you are part of this covenant. How does that work? Well, let's look at the covenant, right, that took place in Sinai. the third, בחודש השלישי לצאת בני ישראל מארץ מצרים, בחודש הזה באו מדבר סיני, right, it's been 50 days, right, in the third month, we come to Sinai, and God says, ועתה אם שמוע תשמעו בקולי, right, and now, if you shall listen to my voice, ושמרתם את בריתי, and keep my covenant, והייתם לי סגולה מכל העמים, you should be a treasured nation, a special nation, כי לי כל הארץ, right? For the land is mine, and I can do as I please, and I can make you my chosen nation, my representatives on earth, right? And what is the covenant? What do you get? ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש, right? And so if you accept my covenant and you hear my voice and if you follow the commitments, right, as we will, detail in the entire Sefer Torah afterwards, if you follow all of that, then that'll make you a mamlechet kohanim vegoy kadosh. You should be a mighty priestly kingdom and a holy nation. All right. What happens if you don't? If you don't follow the terms of the covenant, then you won't be a mighty kingdom. You'll be a despised nation, sent out into exile and persecuted for 2,000 years. However, following the terms of the covenant, or more precisely, not following the terms of the covenant, doesn't annul the covenant. What does it do? It makes us not such a respected nation among all the other nations. It makes us a persecuted nation as opposed to a mighty superpower. So in order to make this covenant with God, we need to accept it, which was done. And it says, ve'ata im shamoa tishme'u bekoli, right? The acceptance of the covenant is done by hearing God's voice. All right, let's look here. It says, atem yidatem, right? It's when Moshe Rabbeinu is, and then what happens is we have this whole Ma'amad Har Sinai, right? The 10 Commandments, God tells us the 10 Commandments, and this is how it's described in Sefer Shemot. It says, Vayavo Moshe, right? So they accept the covenant. It says, Vayomer Adonai Moshe, and God says to Moshe, Hine anochi ba elecha be'av he'anan, I'm going to come, right, I'm going to present myself before you in front of the whole nation in this cloud, this foggy cloud. בעבור ישמע העם בדברי עמך, right? So that the nation shall hear me speaking to you. וגם בך יאמינו לעולם. And by hearing me speak to you, by hearing my voice, right, they shall believe you and your Torah forever. And then Moshe prepares the nation, and he prepares the mountain. There's a certain area where nobody could go. And then it says, Vahi bayom hashenishi, and on the third day of their preparations, Vahi kolot uvrakim, ve'anan kaved al ahar, and there's these loud noises, right? There's thunder, and there's lightning, and this the cloud descends on the mountain. It says v'kol shofar hazak me'od, in a very, very loud sound, voice, the sound of a shofar. Vayeherad kol ha'am asher b'machaneh, and the whole nation is trembling from this experience. It says, Vayosem Moshe et ha'am likrat ha'elohim, and Moshe brings the nation up before God. Vayityasevu betachtit ha'har, and they're all assembling at the bottom of the mountain. It says, V'har Sinai ashan kulo, and the entire mountain is going up in smoke. Mipnei asher yarad alav Adonai ba'esh, because God descended on the mountain in fire. V'yal ashano ke'eshen kivshan, right? And the fire of the smoke, the steam came up from the mountain like a burning furnace. Vayeherad kol ha'ar me'od, and the whole mountain now trembled. So you have the nation trembling at the bottom. You have the mountain itself trembling. Vahi kol ha'shofar holech v'hazek me'od. Moshe yedaber v'ha'elohim ya'anenu b'kol. Says, and they hear the voice of the shofar. It's getting louder and louder and louder. V'hikol ha'shofar holech. It's going v'hazek me'od, and it's getting stronger and stronger. Moshe yedaber. Moshe speaks to God, and God responds. V'elohim ya'anenu. God responds to him b'kol, with a sound, with a voice. What voice? It's the sound of the shofar. That's what the people hear. By the way, they don't hear Anochi Adonai Elohecha, right? What they hear is this huge sound, this really, really large sound, the sound of the shofar. And then what's interesting is when Moshe repeats this experience 40 years later to the new generations, right? So he says, okay, so these are the 10 commandments. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, right? And who says, Lo et avotenu karat Adonai et Berit hazot. 40 years later, the new generation was about to enter the land. He says, the Berit that God made, right, in Horeb, in Har Sinai, he says, Lo et avotenu. We didn't make this covenant with our ancestors, with our fathers. Ki itanu, with us. Anachnu ele po kulanu chaim. Us who are alive today. And again, us who are here alive today in the year 2025, right? It's with us that God makes this covenant. And how does this work out? We have the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments were presented to the people in the sound of a shofar. Says that the devarim ha'ele diber Adonai el kol kehalechem bahar. Says these are the things that were spoken at the mountain, Mount Sinai. Mitoch ha'esh ha'anan v'harafel, right? From within the midst of the fire and the clouds and the steam and the fog. Says kol gadol velo yasaf. Says this great, tremendous voice, sound, velo yasaf, says with a great voice, and it went on no more, which I think is a mistranslation of velo yasaf. And we'll get into that. What does this really mean a little bit later on? It says, when you heard the sound, ותקרבון אליי כל ראשי שבטיכם, and then everyone came and they said, God showed us, right, his great glory, ואת קולו שמענו מתוך האש, and his voice we heard from within the fire, right? Hayom הזה ראינו, this day we saw that God speaks with man, and he can survive and he can live. So the sound that we heard in Sinai, the voice of God, right? This was the sound of the shofar. Now, what happened to that sound? Well, what's the nature? I want to discuss a little bit about the nature of the God's voice. Let's go back to the first time God spoke, right? We're going back to Bereshit. All right, it says, V'yomer Elohim yehi or, right? God said, let there be light, vayhi or, and there was light. All right, the year is 1965 in the United States of America. Two engineers who are working for Bell Technologies, they stumbled upon what turned out to be a very amazing discovery. They had this special telescope. It was a telescope that works on radio. It's not to look in and see, it's for listening, right? They were working for Bell, which is a telephone company in the United States. And everywhere they pointed this telescope, they heard this static in the background. It turned out to be that they discovered the cosmic background radiation of, which is residue of the Big Bang, of the universe. So what happened was, this is what scientists, they theorized, well, if there was a Big Bang, if when the universe was created, there was this huge explosion of energy, right? And it went out and it stretched out throughout the universe. Well, there should be this background radiation that should be able to be sensed throughout the universe. And what these two engineers discovered was this cosmic background radiation. So what happens when God said, let there be light, and then there was light, there was this big bang of light, of energy, and as the universe expanded and stretched out, that light never actually disappeared. It just diminished. Its presence became very, very small, to the point where till today, that light in the form of static, if you hear in the radio, a little part of that is residue of the Big Bang, and it's called the cosmic background radiation. Now, this was just the first Big Bang. The truth is, the way the world then proceeded to evolve was through a series of Big Bangs. First of all, we say on Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Harat Olam. This is the day the world was conceived, right? The world was created on Rosh Hashanah. This Big Bang took place and the world was created. Until today, we have that residue of the Big Bang, but that was, we'll call it the Big Bang of matter. of the material world. What came next was another Big Bang. There was a Big Bang of vegetation. All of a sudden, the entire world was covered with vegetation. From a barren world, all of a sudden, you have leaves and forests and grass growing out everywhere simultaneously throughout the entire world. And then we have what the scientists call the Big Bang of the amphibious world, of everything in the seas. All of a sudden, all the oceans were flush with fish and mammals and sea mammals and sea creatures all over the world. And then you have the Big Bang of the biological world, of creatures all over the world. Every single step in the creation happened in these Big Bangs. So we went from matter to vegetation to earlier life forms and animals. And then according to the scientists, about 10,000 years ago, when prehistoric man started assembling into farmer societies, you had the Big Bang of language, and language started to develop. And that's, so we have this progression from matter, right, to a vegetation, to living creatures. Then you have to call it intelligent creatures speaking language. But that wasn't the last Big Bang. There was one more Big Bang after that. I call it the Big Bang of Revelation. And this took place on the 6th of Sivan, year 2448 from the creation of the world. This took place in somewhere in Saudi Arabia, most likely, at the foot of Mount Sinai, when God revealed himself to mankind. And that Big Bang, which was described as a kol gadol, a very, very large sound, the sound of the shofar, vahi kol shofar holech v'chazek me'od, right? It says kol gadol velo yasaf. Lo yasaf isn't as we saw translated before, where it never persisted. Lo yasaf, we have a pasuk in Megillat Esther. It says, "V'zichram lo yasuf mizar'am." He says, the memory of Esther lo yasuf, it means it'll never be wiped out, mizar'am, from their descendants, meaning, and for halakha, we know that while in the future all the fasts will be canceled, right? One thing will stay, and that is Esther, right? The story of Purim will never be forgotten. It's been canonized forever. All right, V'zichram lo yasuf mizar'am. It means that, kol gadol velo yasaf, this great voice, velo yasaf means that it will always be continued. While just like in the Big Bang, we had this huge explosion of light, and billions of years later, we still have residue of that light that needs to be amplified in order to hear. So too, the voice of God, right? There was this Big Bang of revelation, and years later, that voice is still present. It's just a lot more subtle. On Rosh Hashanah, there's a piyut that the Ashkenazim say, which didn't make any sense to me when I first listened to it. All right, the piyut is called Untane Tokef. Untane Tokef Kidushat Hayom, Ki hu Yom Nora Ba'ayom. And then it says, Shofar Gadol Yitaka, right? Or Yitka, you're going to blow this big shofar. And it says, Kol demama daka ishama, which is generally understood as, and you will hear the sound of a still silence. And that made no sense to me. How could it be that if you blow a big shofar, right, then either there's going to be a loud noise or there's going to be silence? How did you hear silence? That didn't make any sense to me at all. But it turns out that's not what the word dimama means. In modern Hebrew, when we say dimama, we mean silence. But dimama, and this is something that Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan brings in his commentary to Sefer HaYetzirah, the Book of Creation. He says something interesting. There's an interesting sentence there. The Book of Creation starts dealing with numbers and letters. And when he's dealing with some of the letters, specifically with the letters Mem and Shin, it says Mem domemet v'Shin shoreket. All right, so what does that mean? It says Mem domemet. I would think that means that the Mem is silent, but Shin shoreket. What's Sefer HaYetzirah is saying is these are the sounds that these letters make. Mem makes the sound, or the sound the mem makes is called demama. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan explains that demama actually means the humming of a mem, like that. And shin shoreket literally means the shin makes the sound of a shh, like that. And in his commentary, he explains that these are two different forms of meditation. You see people sitting down in meditation, right? He says you can have either a humming sound going like that, or there's another form of meditation you can do with the sound of the sheen, shh, like that. All right? And we see when Eliyahu Hanavi, talking about many, many years after Ma'amad Har Sinai, Eliyahu Hanavi, he's running away from the king and the queen, right? King Ahav and the queen Izebel, who are after him, want to kill him, and he runs away. He runs back to Har Sinai, back to Horeb, and he receives the vision from God, right? God says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm left alone. All right, everyone's against me. Everyone's trying to kill me." And he's in this whole, emotional state, and he's mad, and he's angry, and he's sad, and he's running away, and all sorts of things are going over him. And it says, "Vayomer kano kineti Adonai sevaot." Right, I'm very jealous for the sake of God. Ki azvu beritecha bnei Israel. Right, it says the nation of Israel, they forsake your covenant. Et mizbechotecha harasu. Right, they destroy your altar. Et neviecha haregu b'cherem. They're persecuting the true. They're persecuting the true prophets. They killed many of them. It says, "Va'ivater ani levadi," and I alone remain. Va'ivakshu et nafshi nekahta, and they are coming after me. They're trying to kill me as well. And God says to him, "Se ve'amata bahar lifnei Adonai." It says he found a cave in the mountain in Har Sinai, and that's where he's camping out. And God says, "Come out, right, and stand on the mountain." It says, "Vehine Adonai over," and God passes before him. "Beruach gedola vehazak mefarek harim umshaber selaim." And it says, and there's this very strong wind coming. It's super, super strong. It can break, the wind itself can break stones. And break down mountains, lifnei Adonai. And then God says, "Lo baruach Adonai," right? God doesn't present himself doesn't reveal himself in these loud winds, in these strong winds. V'chara ruach ra'ash. Says, and after the winds, he sends an earthquake. It says, lo bara'ash Adonai. Right? But God doesn't reveal himself in these earthquakes. V'achar harash ish. Says, and after this earthquake, he brings down fire and lightning. It says, lo ba'esh Adonai. He says, no, God doesn't reveal himself in fire. It says, v'achar ha'ish. It says, and after the fire, kol demama daka. He says, he reveals himself in a still, small voice. The demama daka. This is the residue of the kol shofar holech v'hazek me'od that we heard in Sinai. Eliyahu HaNavi returns hundreds of years later to the same place, and he says, if you calm down, right, if you settle your mind and relax, forget your troubles for a minute, and listen carefully, you will hear my voice, and the voice of God presents itself as a kol demama daka, a still, small, subtle voice. Where is this kol? Do we have to go to Har Sinai in order to hear it? Well, Bilam, he says, when he's trying to swear at Am Yisrael, and it turns out to a blessing, he says, Adonai Eloha ve'imo utruat melech bo. He says, this nation is so special. He says that its God is with him. He says, utruat melech, and the trumpets of the king, which the tiruah is actually the sound of the shofar, says, utruat melech bo. It doesn't say with him, imo. Bo. It's in him. It says, this sound, this kol demama daka, this sound, the residue of what our ancestors heard in Har Sinai, right? This sound that made us the special nation who extends not just to those who were present at Har Sinai, but those who came later, the next generation, and the generations afterwards, and not just those who are descended from them, but Gerecha Hashem Bisharecha, those who join Am Yisrael as well. Says the sound of this kol shofar holech v'hazek me'od, right? It says utruat melech bo. That sound is engraved in their soul. And on Rosh Hashanah, when they say shofar gadol yitka, right? You blow a shofar. The kol demamad daka yishama, the sound, the still subtle sound of God, the demama yishama, it shall be heard through the shofar. It says, what is the shofar? By the way, it's interesting, if you look up the CBR, right, the cosmic background radiation, the telescope they use actually looks like a giant shofar, which is very interesting, which amplifies the Shin Shoreket. But the shofar has no sound in itself. All it does, it amplifies the sound of the mem domemet. I've blown the shofar, Baruch Hashem, many times, right? All you do is you vibrate your lips the same way you would do when you're pronouncing a mem. You do that into the shofar, and that amplifies that kol demamad daka. What God gave us, He gave us this tool so that once a year we can hush all the sounds around us. We all have all these voices telling us call it the Yetzer Hara, telling us to make the wrong decisions, to go down the wrong path. We have these voices telling us we're not good enough. We have these voices, all these limiting beliefs, right, that are always speaking to us. And God is telling us, shut all those voices up. Just once a year, come listen to the Shofar, who comes to amplify my voice, right? God's voice that is within us as well. Shut out the Yetzer Hara and listen to my voice. Just forget about everything. A lot of people that like to say, have all these different things in your mind while you're listening to the shofar, right? All these kavanot, all these things that you should think. Don't think anything. Erase everything. The one kavanah you should have during the blowing of the shofar is just focus on the sound of the shofar and nothing else. Right? When the tokea goes up to say the berachot before the shofar, he says, "Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'sivanu." God sanctified us in His mitzvot, and He commanded us v'sivanu nishmoa kol shofar, to hear the voice of the shofar, nothing else. Just listen to the voice of the shofar. That is the voice of God that He instilled in us at Har Sinai, that is still present in each and every one of us. And that voice is supposed to guide us into making the right decisions throughout the year, right? To go down that righteous path, the path to life, the path to God, right? And so that's my message about the Rosh Hashanah and the Shofar. We're joining in every single time into this covenant that God made with us, right? The covenant, the terms of the covenant is, besides, if we follow the terms of the covenant, will be a great, mighty nation. But in order to be this chosen people, all we need to do is accept it on ourselves and listen to the voice of God, which is amplified in the Beit Knesset every year on the Rosh Hashanah. And let that voice guide us throughout the year to make good and right decisions and to live a good and prosperous life full of beracha. And that's my message on Perashat Nisavim and Rosh Hashanah and the significance of the shofar. Anyone have any questions or comments? I see someone raising their hand. Romana?
No, I was clapping. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
תודה רבה.
Any questions, anybody? All right, so we finished a little bit early, so we got some extra time, 20 minutes or 15 minutes, if you guys want to break, to